And by the way, that's why the cloud is so successful, because it's so easy to use. It's brilliant. Okay, but how do you manage that?
Think about it. If you're an attacker and you manage to have somehow access there, there is a lot of things you can do.
You're going to be shocked, but phishing campaigns are very successful on cloud attacks.
When you're afraid of a breach and you lock down Amazon.com, that's millions and millions and millions for every minute of downtime.
All right, so we're back. This is Dan Berthet, your host. I'm IoT Security Director at Bitdefender, and I have with me a great panel of my colleagues. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Subtopic of today's conversation is cloud security. So let's start with Christina. Who are you? What do you do?
Hi, I'm Cristina Batamanu. I am Senior Manager at Bitdefender. I lead 3 teams. One of them is actually detection on cloud infrastructure. The second one is post-breach investigations, and the third one is validating the technologies that are delivered from lab.
Awesome.
I'm Rafael Pere. I lead product management for cloud security at Bitdefender, and I've been doing cloud for a while, and security for a while as well. Everything from I started doing security on Android, the operating system, Google Play services, etc., and then moved on to the cloud because phones were too small, you know.
That's awesome, Rob. Thank you, Dragos.
Hi, I'm Carlos Dragos. I'm the Vice President of Threat Research here in Bitdefender, and I handle any, let's say, the set of detection and response technologies, meaning EDR, XDR, and obviously through the XDR, we handle cloud security, cloud protection. At the same time, we do handle the risk analytics platform, which obviously, as Rafael said, it's going to be heavily involved in everything related to cloud security and cloud risk assessment.
So it's, cloud security is widely talked about, and, we know our usual suspect conferences where everybody has an opinion. And I know we talked about this previous, and I feel like you have a couple of myths to dispel about, the perception and what's actually changing, what's new. And I like to talk about that. So in our opinion, let's start with, the basics. What's cloud security? What do we talk about when we talk about it? I know it's a stupid question, but I think it's going to set the scene. So, or, not stupid, but simple questions. So what do we consider cloud security, and what do we focus on when we talk about it in our experience here?
Well, so cloud security is not just cloud security. Generally, when we talk about cloud security, we mean cloud native security, or how do you secure the modern way of developing and deploying and running applications, which means that you often will have some, if not all, in the cloud. But essentially what that means is you could be doing cloud native security without anything in the public cloud, right? Generally, we see that most people will have some, but what it means is technologies like containers, like container orchestration, and obviously, single centralized management plane that you have with the public cloud providers, but that you may also have in private cloud or on-prem, right? So it's that set of technologies and the problems that come with it.
And the portfolio of threats available is quite large, and I would encourage us to talk a little bit about the largest kind of sets of threats that we're seeing. Anything from data exfil to just whatever, compromising somebody's farm. So do you want to kind of cover those, and let's talk about a little bit about what are the most popular, or that we're seeing that is the most effective recently that has caught our attention as researchers.
The attacks are very similar. They do have the similar kill chain as the traditional local ones. You're going to be shocked, but phishing campaigns are very successful on cloud attacks. Of course, we see also sophisticated credential extraction. For example, when we researched Google Workspace platform, we found a technique where Google Workspace credentials can be extracted through Google Credential Provider for Windows application. Of course, you need more in-depth knowledge, to extract, refresh tokens, access tokens, and request undocumented APIs. But the sad truth is that phishing campaigns are very successful. In terms of attacks against cloud platforms, they are very accurate, I might say. The threat actors manage to copy, for example, Microsoft login page, and they just change the landing URL, and they receive the credentials, the cookies, the access tokens, and so on. Once the credentials are extracted, attacks can go in various ways. So they do have, for example, techniques such as persistence. They different from platform to platform. For example, we see the persistence technique on Azure AD implemented using automation accounts, or for Google Workspace application scripts, or for AVS using EC2 templates, for example. We have exfiltrations from storage accounts, from storage buckets, from S3 packets, depending on the cloud platforms. And of course, we see attacks that have an impact stage, mainly on data destruction. For example, something like ransomware techniques, where they create encryption keys, they encrypt the storage resources, and then they delete the encryption keys after, of course, they have them backed up. So in this way, they manage to encrypt the cloud resources, and they ask for ransom. Exactly.
And the scariest part is actually the fact that we were talking about this earlier, of course, obviously the scale of a cloud instance and the the breadth of data that can be exfiltrated, compromised, but also the fact that gaining access to instances is hard to notice because of the potentially millions of events, while a single very smartly crafted attack is going to potentially go unnoticed, and then you have the permanence that you mentioned, and the attacks can go on. So how is, I'm trying to work and understand how are we addressing this in a way that we're staying ahead of the curve and kind of keeping tabs on this? What are the methods that we employ to get to find these attacks and prevent them?
So generally speaking, the technology that is used for this type of detection is XDR. But that's a really broad term. So XDR pretty much is a correlation technology. The value of an XDR technology, besides the correlation capabilities, lays in the sensors. So the more you get visibility within logs, within different services that run within a specific cloud, the more you are capable of actually understanding an attack and correlating things there. And it's not just this, following what Christina said. Pretty much all of the attacks are, in a way similar or follow the same attack logic with a different way of deployment. So Christina was talking about ransomware. Ransomware was not initially specific to cloud, was initially specific to server, to some endpoints, but the logic is the same. Encrypt something of value, ask for a demand, so the same logic. The only difference is that you're now going to do this in a different way, but with the same outcome. So from one perspective, it's like you have so many attack vectors, a much broader attack surface that you need to cover in cloud, because every cloud is different, every cloud has its own particularities, and on top of this, the type of services that actually run on that cloud, they also have their own particularities. The usage of certain type of, let's say, services that are provided by that cloud host also have their particularities, and you need to be able to extrapolate information from all of them. That's one thing. The second one is how you get that information. And in most cases, we're going to talk a little bit about usability, because the easiest way is to actually use some of their services that can provide information. For example, if you're looking into cloud specific to Microsoft, you can use Microsoft Graph to extrapolate some information out of there. Now, this does has some, let's say, utility, and in the sense that all you need to do is just provide some credential, and then you're going to grab that information and correlate it somewhere else. So from a user perspective, you don't need to deploy anything there in the cloud. You just use something really useful. On the other hand, you might not get that type of information, or you might not always get the entire information that you desire, or the level of information that you desire might be too verbose. So you do have a lot of, let's say, exploratory artifacts that you need to cover in this case. Machine learning, any type of data mining techniques definitely helps. It can help you, reduce the amount of data that you're looking into. It can help you limit that kind of data to a specific correlation. The third one is you also need to understand that attackers are usually, the concept of cloud, in many cases, attacks specific to cloud are attacks that you can actually do from outside the cloud. You don't need to enter an organization. I'm not saying it's not possible, but usually you're targeting a cloud that has some sort of, service that is, visible from outside the cloud. So you need to also take this into consideration, because the entry point, it's also going to be a little bit different. It's more likely to, for them to actually target the cloud within your own services that are actually exposed. Technologies like external attack surface management actually cover this exact part, where you're kind of looking to a cloud that can be targeted. On the other hand, there is also another dimension to this problem, and it's related to risk assessment. And I'm actually going to let Raf talk more about this, because it's one topic that I know he enjoys. The risk assessment part, it's also important, because with large cloud infrastructure comes potential risk, and the more you understand the risk, the easier it will be to actually understand how attackers are going to leverage those risks. And Raf, I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about this.
So I think when we think about the fundamental concept of prevention, protection, detection, response, recover. But let's talk about prevention, protection, detection, and response. When you're looking at endpoints, endpoint protection basically sits on the endpoint, and you have a layer that can look at what's happening and stop things before it happens. In the cloud, we can't install anything on like AWS's computer or Azure's computer. We can install some things on virtual machines, but we can't install something on the control panel, and that's how you interact with the cloud. And by the way, that's why the cloud is so successful, because it's so easy to use. You can get any developer to spin up 100 instances all across the world, and it took them one command line. And that is the brilliance of the cloud, and also the hardest part about securing it, because you can't put something that's in line to check and block. AWS can do that, but then, they're trying to get people to use it. You don't want to block the developers, etc. What that means is that protection is not possible, because you can't have an agent that sits on AWS. Now, for a lot of other areas, you can still do protection, because the same things, and a virtual machine in the cloud is a virtual machine. And so you can do everything that you could there. What that means is then you need to focus on, left and right. Left on the prevention side, right on detection and response. But detection and response, because the tools that attackers are using are the same tools that developers are using. And when you're talking about typically this is going to be infrastructure for business applications that are critical to businesses, downtime is extremely costly. Blocking is something that people are extremely careful about, because when you're afraid of a breach and you lock down Amazon.com, that's millions and millions and millions for every minute of downtime. So you need to be very, very careful. So that kind of changes what you need to do. Detection is great and necessary, but also if you rely solely on that, it's going to be really, really expensive. So you go to prevention, and that's where we need to look at it from a risk perspective. The brilliant thing about the cloud, compared to kind of more traditional computing platforms, is it's extremely, extremely granular in the control that you have. All right. And that is a brilliant feature. For example, there are more than 40,000 different unique permissions across just the top 3 and with subtle nuances like describe instance, singular, does different things to describe instances, plural. And I still don't know exactly which one is which, right? And so you've got 40,000. So if you can manage that properly, you can cut down your attack surface and do least privilege better than we've ever been able to do it. Imagine that you're in a building, you've got these key cards that you can have. And you could, if you were able to do so, technically, you could program that every single thing you could do in that building, turn on a switch, open a door, go to the coffee machine. You could have permissions that say, oh, you can go to the coffee machine, you can press the button, or you can, clean it out. Those are all distinct permissions. It's brilliant. Okay, but how do you manage that? And so the challenge then becomes, it's not the theory of doing least privilege, it's how do you do it in practice? And that's where thinking about risk management across cloud and everything else is going to be really important, because if you look just at the cloud piece, you're going to see I've got millions of things that I could focus on. I could disable all of those permissions, and one by one, I'm going to have loads of different groups of different types of developers and etc. Completely unmanageable. So the solution to that is to, similarly to what is done on XDR, when we think about I'm going to correlate data from different sources to get the best view of the whole problem. On the risk side, you can do the same thing. Does it really matter if somebody can press the coffee machine? Nah. Okay, if somebody can mess around with the firmware of a printer, I'd be a little more worried, right? And so now you can see, is that printer in a publicly accessible area? Do you have a server that has a vulnerability that could be exploitable, or that we know with the threat intelligence that we have that is being exploited in the wild? Then all of a sudden you can say, of all of the things that you could fix, which are tens of thousands at least, this is the first one that you should focus on. Here are the next ones. And so it helps to cut down on the noise so that you can actually practically prevent the stuff that's going to be causing the issues that you need to detect.
You mentioned that I was going to be surprised about phishing being the greatest avenue, and I indeed I am, and I'm sure everybody else would be. Why is that? Is that because of the inherent nature, security posture of the medium, or is it just the human factor? What do you think is the angle there? And is that going to be, or is that, or looking forward, is that still going to be the main tool of choice?
Well, it's definitely the human factor, of course. But as I've said, with cloud platforms, the phishing is very accurate because the login pages are available. So the threat actors can really copy them and, serve you an URL where they just bring up the page of the login page, but the ending URL is different. They are very successful because they generate, let's say, an exponential wave after that. It's necessary for one employee to get compromised. The threat actor uses the credential, logs in, sees all the contacts, and sends the same phishing email to all the contacts. And that means the rest of the employees, the partners, the clients, and through these campaigns, several other companies get compromised, and so on. So it's an exponential chain. And these credentials can be used in different ways. They can be sold, to other threat actors, to other type of attacks. For example, we have seen that a set of leaked credentials were used to deploy miners on the resources, on the cloud resources of the victim. So they use the power computation from the victim to mine, and they generate costs, additional costs to the victims. So I guess it's kind of both things, human factor, security posture, and of course the threat actor, which is getting better and better.
And in terms of the, like you said, like, you know, and I love the examples. Maybe we can find some more. You know, you said ransomware had was a good prevalence in there, and that's a lucrative business. You can, you know, obviously hold the data ransom, or you can exfil it and probably resell it, whatever the avenues are. But that's a lucrative way to go at it. Mining is also probably equally so. What other you know, types of threats are there, risks, and yeah, I mean, of course they could vary just because, you know, there's different organizations that use clouds in different ways, and there's but I was trying to understand the prevalence, maybe just give some numbers and what else we're seeing from the research side.
There are a lot of spam campaigns, a lot of them, because, as I said, of leaked credentials. We have seen ransom, but not as prevalent as for local endpoints, mostly because you need to get admin rights inside the cloud infrastructure. It's leaked credentials are not necessarily admins in the cloud infrastructure. So you have to have additional steps of privilege escalations and so on. Exfiltration of data, we've seen that a lot because companies do store important data on cloud. That's the reality. Mostly it's around data because
Obviously,
that's what's stored there.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Christina here. If we're thinking about these attacks from an attacker perspective, right? So first of all, you're going to target the cloud because there is something of value there. You're not going to target the cloud, and you know, think about that. Cloud usually means, you know, images that can be respawned, so on. So if it's, you know, even if you damage something there, then, you know, can be easily you know, reverted. So there has to be something of value. Usually it's data. If you find some data, if you manage to exfiltrate some data, then this actually has power. You can definitely encrypt some data, obviously. So, you know, ransomware, extortionware, this type of attacks are going to be more focused on this. But also in terms of the entry points, while you can scan the internet for a potential cloud out there that, you know, maybe has some vulnerabilities, it's usually much easier to, you know, try some phishing campaign over somebody that you know, a company that you know that is being using a cloud, especially since you might actually be able to find other resources there that can further be used. I would also say that there is also another you know, potential future impact of the cloud that's pretty much related to AI. You know, if we're thinking from the, you know, from the AI perspective, and if we're thinking on how much AI actually changes things, it's more likely that services that rely on AI, if it's either, you know, something that takes some data, fine-tune a model, you know, or even if it's just a proxy to another service that, you know, translates some data, are most likely going to be deployed on the cloud. This means that there is a whole new attack surface that needs to be taken in consideration. Think about it. If you're an attacker and you manage to have somehow access there, there is a lot of things you can do, you know, starting from poisoning the data. So, you know, maybe the model that is used by somebody is going to create a completely different set of responses, from finding the training data, because this could, you know, also
It's valuable
work,
in itself.
yeah, it's valuable information, work within your rounds. But, you know, most importantly, you can actually control certain kind of things that happen within that space. Now, while this is, you know, an area where things are still developing, I'm 100% certain that at some point cloud is going to be a very, let's say, important step to target, in particular when talking about the large language model and AI models and training that are being done in particular there. And this is something that, you know, everybody can, you know, understand. Right now, I think it's more easy to, you know, rent some powerful computers there to train something for a while, rather than, you know, actually buy them entirely and, you know, hold them within your own organization.
If you can buy them, because you can.
If you can buy them,
Yes.
because you can.
Because today the most powerful GPUs that you need
That's why you can share
inference.
them and rent them for a while and do your thing. But yes, only a few organizations have the capacity to acquire the capacity that they need to do it locally for themselves, and that's the challenge. But it's an interesting topic, and of course, you know, I mean, there's all these every time we talk about AI, there's all the you know, guesses we're making, and I'm sure we all have been looking as well. We ourselves have been looking at the progress and trying to, you know, foresee what, you know, the threats might be, and without revealing anything that we can't reveal right now. What other findings do you think we have that we could share by looking at the space and estimating what's going to come? I totally agree that AI is going to definitely make use of you know, because obviously most of it will rely on the cloud. So do we have any other you know, things we could share on the matter on the matter of AI?
Well, I would say that at some point, and you know, if we're looking on, you know, the current services that are provided by LLM, larger LLM companies, at some point we're going to get to a point where you're not just going to provide a cloud service for an LLM, you're also going to provide some services where you get different models that you can maybe change a little bit, modify, and so on. So you're going to have a more customizable machine learning specific cloud, right? So right now you have like in most cases, what I'm saying, it's not unusual, but you know, in most cases right now you have some scenarios where, you know, I'm using an API, I'm sending some data to a cloud, but most likely, and as I said, this is something that's already happening. We're going to go more into the rounds of having, you know, cloud specific for training, where you get like a lot of processing power, cloud specific for inference, where maybe you're using some more specific, I don't know, GPU or NPU infrastructure that are going to be cheaper, but allow you the inference part to be, you know, quite fast. So things are going to be split into different ML problems, and each one of them will actually come with their own issues in terms of, you know, so for example, in training, one very important thing we need to take into consideration is the privacy of the data that we're going to use for training. While in inference, we don't necessarily, if we get some data and we just return some reply, we don't necessarily need to take this into consideration all of the time. But in training, we do have some private data that we're training for. So if somebody at some point has access there, then we do have a problem. And, you know, I was actually talking with Rafael before this, and, you know, we were keep saying something that pretty much the problems are the same, but at the same time are quite different. Ransomware pretty much looks at things that are important, that if encrypted, they're going to do a lot of damage. Well, if we're looking on the trends right now, what we actually see is that, you know, they look for data that if exfiltrated will actually produce a lot of damage. So I don't know, let me try a scenario. Let's say that you have data from all of your patients and you're training a model to extrapolate something. Well, losing that kind of data could be millions. So, and with this comes a lot of other security responsibilities that you need to take into consideration, because, you know, the law is pretty clear in this regard.
And if you think about the types of data that typically organizations have started to move to the cloud, especially if they're a little more conservative, they're going to go with the, you know, banks are not going to put their core banking systems in the cloud right away. Some do, you know, and there is a move towards that. But so the data that has been in the cloud has been the slightly less sensitive data. And now all of a sudden what you're saying is, if you want to do AI properly, you need vast quantities of not at all anonymized. I need the raw data, and then you just dump it here, and that here happens to be somewhere where if somebody has set the wrong flag, everybody can access it. And that's compounded by the fact that you're going to have lots of dedicated clouds, and we're seeing some cloud providers that are specialized in AI and AI only versus the generalist hyperscalers like AWS and Azure and GCP. And if you as an organization need to protect that, it's kind of the same problem of you know, cloud sprawl, and you've got all of these SaaS applications, and their security models are all different, and one has like 5 different, levels of admin, and the other one has 2, and so you're going to have this larger and larger diversity and just number of things that you need to take care of, while at the same time you're putting more and more sensitive data so close to where it can be breached.
And that's, the normal effect. And in fact, you want to have it, accessible and in the same place. And I'm sure you're following and you're seeing this as well. You're right about I was assuming even you gave the example of a bank, and I assume there's a lot of customer data on there as well. What are the industries that are more at risk that are not obvious, you would say, and then it's this new foray where data is just generally more available, and who should worry more? Or
something to consider when you're thinking about the cloud, and also the kind of the dynamic of attackers trying to break into somewhere. It's fundamentally a monetary problem. How expensive is it for me to break in? How much money do I get out? And so the more expensive it is to get in, better it is. The less money I can get out, the better it is from like breaking down the economic viability of these actors. One of the challenges that we have with that is, how do you put in blockers that don't remove the whole point of the cloud, right? And so being able to tune it so that you stop only the attackers is extremely, extremely difficult. And you need to be doing it in an automated way, because otherwise the granularity isn't there. Otherwise you block the millions of legitimate requests just to stop the three bad ones.
And to continue the idea, the work from home or from anywhere context brings much more problems, for much more.
just adds complexity to
Exactly.
just adds another parameter, another attack surface.
The fact that
just
people
wasn't there
travel
before.
a lot
Yeah.
for businesses, and the fact that they should access the resources from anywhere, more and more difficult to identify those suspicious access that are the actual threat actors.
How did it look from the researcher perspective? For example, when work from home became a thing, how did the new data points, how did that look from, you're used to having this sets of, the data points, and this is how it normally looks like. You kind of have a baseline, you're starting to see what's new, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic hits and people start working from home, and just this whole new behavior that you're not seeing. How did that look from you guys, from your perspective?
So let me give you like a very quick example so that you understand. So for example, let's take you. So if I know that you're working just from your company, and let's say that I know the location of that company, the IP that the company is using. So some of the potential rules that I can use is that, hey, access to this cloud has to be done from that company. So there is some sort of anomaly detection logic, like if access to this cloud is going to be done from a different location, then it's good enough for me to actually trigger a detection. So that I can definitely do. On the other hand, the moment we start, you can work from anywhere, we have to change the logic here. So obviously that same logic cannot work. You can try to connect from there. So I cannot use the same
It's no longer just location. It could
So-
be different
so-
time. It could be different time zone. It could be
exactly.
a different environment where you connect from.
Now, the change, if we're looking into the same concept, is, in our case, it's what we call an impossible trouble, meaning that if you connect from a specific location, doesn't matter which one, then I can measure if you're connecting to another location of a different time, but that time had to be enough for you to actually move from one location to another. Let me simplify this. So let's say that you're connecting from Washington to a specific AWS cloud, and in 5 minutes you're doing the same connection from Hong Kong. Well, that's impossible.
It's a flag.
There are some caveats here. We need to be very careful about VPN services. Another So from
private
this
cloud,
perspective,
private relay stuff, whatever that's
Yeah.
gonna anonymize,
anonymized and so on. And obviously computing this distance also it comes with an issue. So
There's a
if you're very
penalty.
close to the North Pole, you may be on a different latitude, longitude, but since you're close to the North Pole, the distance is actually smaller. So you need to be careful on how you compute these kind of things. But this actually adds a new dimension. On the other hand, I was also, thinking about the question that you had about companies and how they are, impacted. And I think there is one other aspect that we didn't touch here: compliance. The more, this type of cloud services are going to be present there, the more you are going to actually use this with customer data. Compliance is going to be more relevant in
To your
terms
point
of
about medical data as well. Which
my
is
point
even
about
more
medical
regulated
data.
than anything,
And taking this into consideration, I think it will also be something that in the future will have to be, something that every security provider will have to take into consideration. Raf, maybe you want to
and
fill in
the
here with
compliance,
some other
Yeah,
details.
so what we've seen is that the pace of change in compliance standards has grown significantly over the last few years. And you're hearing all of these new acronyms. And in Europe, you'll have heard about NIS2 and DORA. And in the US, you've got NIST, the T, CSF version 2. And all around the world, we're seeing these new specific standards. And if you think about why all of a sudden are the regulators kind of going, not crazy, but like moving much faster to try to regulate. And it's because there is a problem that needs to be solved that hasn't been solved organically. And that problem is that it is too easy to get things wrong in the cloud, and the penalty is so high for a very long time. And we hear less about this now, but a threat in the cloud that we heard 10, 15 years ago, even like 5 years ago, a lot was the misconfiguration. Basically, this is a new technology. It's got lots of buttons. People come in, they don't really know. They flip the wrong one. The door stays open, and then somebody gets breached. Also, it's now in the public. Everybody knows, all of the attackers know all the IP addresses of all of the public cloud providers. They're public, by the way. So they're scanning them. They're scanning them all the time. And so the penalty of making a mistake is so much higher and is so much more immediate. Think of it as if you're in the middle of a really busy street and you're a jewelry store and you just don't lock it, right? Versus, you forgot to lock the back door in some hangar at the back of an industrial plot, blah, blah, blah. Okay, technically those doors are both open, except one has a lot of people walking past it and checking, and the other one, there's a good chance that nobody will even notice that it's there, right? And so that means that you have that significant risk. Now, the basic hygiene of cloud misconfigurations has gone up with the education, more people knowing about them, and cloud providers like setting better defaults, etc. But we're still not there. And that's why regulators are now saying, like, okay, I am going to have to force your hand because this is too costly from a state level to get wrong. And I'm going to also give you, a lot of times people think of compliance as just a burden, but it's not meant to be just a burden. It's also it's guidance. This is what you need to do. Like, let me show you what the bar is, right? And if some already have it, awesome. You just, do a small audit. But if not, then here, you should be using this type of control. You need to be preventing this type of threat, blocking these risks.
And I imagine the associated insurance is probably going to be more affordable if you are following the proper standards and procedures, I would imagine. So it should be a win-win. So, I mean, there's always going to be pushback towards regulation. When we're talking about, for example, when we're talking IoT, regulation is taken too long to appear. So it's either cloud was more attractive or regulation was long overdue.
Probably
so for both.
Uh,
But yes, definitely. And I'm gonna try to I'm gonna ask you, all three of you, what your best guess of the challenges coming forward, and if you can make your best prediction or best care, best concern that you have looking forward in the space as well. Like it seems that it seems that you were right. It seems that misconfiguration is kind of a thing of the past, where like it's not a playground anymore. People are taking it serious. They've done it for a while. They know exactly how to, the cloud providers making it more clear on how to do a proper deployment, and they don't want to lose the business anyway, so it's in their best interest that everybody gets it right. So okay, we're mature now, so what's next? What's going on? What's going to happen? What are we doing to be there? Or is it just going to be plain sailing and do our best to to have the XDR cover as best as we can and just hope nothing really changes? What's your best guess of the future?
I'm happy to start. I believe we're in a state where everybody was unsophisticated, and that includes many of the attackers, because the attackers have exactly the same problems as every other organization, where you upskilling people and learning new technologies and moving. And why are they doing a lot of stuff on traditional infrastructure? Because they've been doing it and it works and it makes a lot of money, right? And the more we're moving to the cloud, they are going to catch up. Like when I see some of the risks that are there for organizations in the cloud, where we actually have visibility into their environments, and you see kind of how unsafe it is. If attackers start to look, it's going to be another reality, because like misconfiguration, we got a baseline of we're washing our hands now. We're not. It's not an operating theater level of cleanliness, right? And when the attackers really start to come, and they're coming more and more, I think there's going to be some heat.
And of course, focus on the incident response, where time is of the essence. If it happens, it happens. But how just that, because of the sheer dimension of the impact that you guys mentioned earlier, that's when it means what matters a lot, the speed of the incident response and being able to identify that.
And it's not just this. Think about it. If you have like a cloud service, it's a cloud service for a reason. You have some SLA, somebody's using that service. This means that certain type of responses that you might use on a regular basis cannot be available right now, right? So you cannot say, hey, something is fishy there. Let's isolate that entire service. Nobody will answer there, because if you do this, you're going to impair some businesses.
So how do you handle that? Because that's exactly
that's very interesting, because again, some rules that apply to endpoint cannot be applied here. So my personal opinion is that you kind of need a managed services here. Somebody that actually understands what is the purpose of that service, and they can act accordingly. In many cases, one potential solution would be to, cut the access. So see exactly what kind of password that they use, change the password and so on. But you also need to understand the changes that they made there. If they, install something, if they change some Lambda function within an AWS or something, you need to understand it. You need to be able to revert it, because otherwise you're going to have like a lot of other, issues up front. And, we can also think even broadly. So, generally we're talking about cloud, but, containers are also in many cases part of the cloud. Even if, people are also using them locally, they are also part of the cloud. And if you're building a container, you also need to take a lot of things into consideration. Like, maybe you have some secrets that you forgot there, and, they can exfiltrate. So yeah, you're going to remove them, but they can also reuse them for a different perspective. So, having some sort of managed services, somebody or some sort of lab that actually investigates the attack and is able to actually understand exactly the impact, but more importantly, what actually happened there, it's quite important in these scenarios. That's my
And do you see any significant changes, or I don't want to say improvements, because it might not necessarily be improvements, but do we foresee anything in the way the cloud services that are offered today are? Do you think there's anything that's going to happen in the near future that's going to reshape the way we have to address the issue, or is it just going to be just keep going this way because it's been working for the last 10 years?
Yes and no. So to some degree, larger cloud providers are going to work similarly add more security measures and so on. On the other hand, to me, the rise of AI for some scenarios will imply some smaller providers that are focused on AI. Now, those smaller providers are likely to be, let's say, for the lack of a better word, less conformed with security measures than the larger one, meaning that the more they have people that start using their infrastructure, the more they will become more attractive to an attacker. And since they don't have the same security measures, they're going to be easier to breach. So yeah, to some degree, some things are going to change, and maybe this is normal with the evolution of technology. Some of these components have to change.
To give my prediction, and to continue the idea of Raf, I think that threat actors are still very active in the traditional ways, is because the important institutions, the governments, mainly the government institutions, are still using traditional infrastructure. You don't see a lot of them using cloud. So they have valid targets in that area, and probably for a while they will stay there. But once they move to cloud, probably threat actors will move with them. And Raf is right. If you as a threat actor are starting to look on those platforms, you will find ways to breach them.
And then you're going to have a new kind of interest from, or probably even more interest from state actors that you didn't previously have, because the
Exactly.
data is just more determining of that.
But and I do agree with everything Christina said. On the other hand, what about data governance, right? So with everything that happened right now, governments are more keen into having my own data in my own establishment, not somewhere within the cloud where somebody can access.
They have their own
So-
cloud.
So
They have their own cloud.
yeah, but it's their own cloud and so on. So I do expect to be like a more nuanced thing here. Indeed, while they are using some things locally, they are going to be targeted like this. On the other hand, there is a clear trend to move to cloud. But on the other hand, if you start moving to cloud, but some government says, hey, maybe the critical data should not be in cloud, should be here. So yeah, it's impossible to really predict what's going to happen. But for sure, it's going to be something where both the security companies and security providers and the attacker as well will have to adjust and evolve with these kind of changes.
There are a ton of, you were talking about regulation and compliance standards, there are a ton of different governments around the world that are enacting laws of data residency. And so it's saying like, wait, hey, if you want to do
Business in
business,
my
you want
region,
to be
you're
a
gonna have
bank, no problem. You can be on the cloud as long as that cloud, as long as all of the
Geographically.
data does not leave the country, which means that, again, we're going from a hyper centralization to an explosion of lots of different points. And we hear about like edge computing, and it's kind of like that. It's still going to be managed centrally. We're not going to go back on that. Like we've seen the benefits of having it there, but now you're going to have like it's going to be all over the place, and that is going to be the nightmare for the security team. But also, I think it's also going to be a little more annoying for the attackers as well, because now you need to look at these different places instead of, imagine if you can breach AWS itself, which by the way hasn't have it. But if you could, you would have access to everything, all of it. But right, so now it's going to be much more distributed, and maybe we'll see more things like much more localized focus on, I don't know, threat actors that are going to focus on specific niche clouds. Because by the way, if you're doing mining, like the beauty of mining and why we see it more on the cloud than elsewhere is that your credit card is on file on the cloud provider, right? That really expensive infrastructure that you're renting, that because you couldn't even buy it, and attacker comes in and says they're going to rack up a tab, $1,000 1,000 machines, all, and they can get the value out of it through cryptocurrency. No need to even ask or talk to you about a ransom. And so I think there'll be some interesting things like that that we'll have to figure out how to plug the gaps for.
Especially with the rise of AI, because it's just I assume and I'm going to quote you on the potentially small providers showing up to cater to those new AI providers, because there'll be potentially prime use cases for mining, especially since they'll be.
And we've seen small providers of cloud services that are specialized in providing GPU access.
Exactly.
That's their purpose. So, and obviously, with the rise of AI, everybody will need these kind of things for training, for inference, for everything else.
And it's harder to spot. Again, it's harder to spot someone that looks like everyone else but is malicious.
Right.
And crypto mining is very GPU intensive.
It looks like
it's not. I mean,
similar to
if it's
a training process.
Yeah,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
It looks okay.
It looks very different to a web server.
Exactly.
So it's
not
really
a
harder
database
to,
for a hotel, but it's this training process that's, oh, by the way, might be mining. Who knows?
So we're gonna have to be more and more fine-grained about how we detect these things.
So I remember you said that it was going to make it harder for the security team, but at the same time, I feel like it's just, or for the researchers, I feel like just maybe it's an opportunity sometimes, even though it's much more work. But that's kind of my reference here. I just wanted to come back to you and commend you guys for doing the work you do on delivering the resolutions and solutions that ultimately help both in terms of detection and remediation later on. I wish we can go on and talk more about this. I kind of want to touch base or forecast. Promise that we're going to talk about edge computing on a future episode as well. It's something that I think we'll need to talk about. So for the time being, I want to thank you, all of you, for taking the time, bringing the knowledge, and the work that you do each. So Raf, Christina, and Dragos, thank you. We'll see you on the next one, hopefully on potentially edge computing, or who knows. And with that said, have a good luck during the rest of the work you do, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.